Thanks very much, Emmett. Our second speaker this evening needs no real introduction in Belfast. John Gray is a well-known figure in terms of librarianship, local history, and earlier left-wing politics in an earlier incarnation. John Gray was for many years librarian of the Linenhall Library. I think he's retired about 2 years. Before that, I know he was a librarian in Belfast Central Library, where he tended, among other things, to the F.J. Bigger collection. He has researched extensively Irish labour history, but his main work is actually a history of the 1907 Belfast Dockers and Carter strike, to which Emmett referred, City in Revolt. He has played a prominent role in local history in North Belfast, and he was also the founding member of the Cave Hill Conservation Campaign. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Gray.
Good evening, everybody. It was on the 3rd of July, 1907, that the Northern Whig gloomily commented, "We're on the eve of an experience something akin to that which has paralyzed Russian cities during the last couple of years." James Larkin, organizer of, in the city, the fledgling National Union of Dock Labourers, had pulled off a masterstroke by recruiting the city's carters almost overnight and calling them out on strike in sympathy with the beleaguered dockers who had been on strike or locked out since early May. It seemed like a revolution to Belfast's obdurate employers. Larkin, the unknown Liverpudlian, speaking in the approved manner of an English slum, as one commentator flatteringly put it, had arrived in January, and by the beginning of April had recruited 2,000 members. What is unquestionable is that he was a supremely eloquent street corner orator. Larkin's extraordinary impact in Belfast must have been as much a surprise to him as to his opponents. Previously, he had achieved no more than modest success at English and Scottish seaports. What was the difference? It lay in the abysmal pay and conditions of the city's unskilled labourers, the unsung workhorses of its industrial triumphs. Skilled wages were equal to any in Britain, while unskilled wages were determined in a parallel Irish economy, one driven ever lower by a constant flood of impoverished rural immigrants coming to the city. This hidden terrain of acute exploitation was one shared across the community divide. Although Catholics were disproportionately likely to be amongst the poorest, the majority within this beleaguered zone were Protestant. No Labour aristocracy there. Larkin's first major breakthroughs were with the overwhelmingly Protestant cross-channel dockers and coal heavers, and this rather than amongst the Catholic deep-sea dockers. Larkin was certainly able to call on the support of the existing labour movement in the city, astonished though they were by these sudden developments. And perhaps more surprisingly, that of the breakaway independent Orange Order. Alex Boyd, leader of the municipal employees and a prominent independent Orange man, provided the strike headquarters. Lindsay Crawford, Grand Master of the Independent Orange Order, was the most penetrating chronicler of the conditions of the unskilled and of the strike in his role as editor of the liberal Ulster Guardian. Was Larkin intent on creating an Irish revolution from these ingredients? No. Rather, he employed the standard militant tactics of the English left. He engaged in millenarian syndicalist rhetoric, the fashion of the time. He used the weapon of the sympathetic strike to the full. Of course, one has to ask what other choices were open to him. What other choices were open to the truly powerless amongst unskilled labor? The employers engaged in their own preemptive sympathetic strike through the Europe-wide Shipping Federation, which provided scab labor from the outset. And they secured an army guard for the quays as early as mid-May. James Sexton, General Secretary of the National Union of Dock Labourers, saw a singular analogy between the Belfast strike and British experience, his own union's formative Liverpool struggle in 1889. The potentially revolutionary aspects of 1907 were unintended. Even with the Carters involved, there were never more than 4,000 men out on strike or locked out during the entire dispute. But the Carters strike extended the contest to the streets, with increasingly violent picketing carried on by ever larger groups of men and soon enough small mobs acting against scab carters and doing so in all the working class areas of the city. In July, not normally a month of cross-community endeavour round here, the strike committee mobilised mass support through meetings held in all areas of the city. Larkin spoke on the Shankill Road, Lindsay Crawford spoke on the Falls Road, and these meetings had massive attendances. All this culminated in a colossal demonstration of up to 100,000 people on the 26th of July. The route of that march, across the Queen's Bridge to Ballymacarrot, back by the Albert Bridge and through to Durham Street, then across the Falls Road, across the Shankill, down the Crumlin Road, through North Queen Street and back by York Street to the city centre, speaks eloquently of working class support across the community divide. Try that route today if you have a march in mind. Well, one consequence of this sort of mass passion growing for working class emancipation, and shall we say a consequence in particular of picket duty or scab guard duty, was the breaking of police morale. On the 27th of July, the police went on strike, occupied Musgrave Street barracks, and threw the gates open to civilian strikers. No matter that the advice of the Labour leaders was cautious in the extreme, this was now a threat to the state. The Irish administration panicked. The State Paper Office contains wonderful telegrams of sheer panic, travelling between the RIC in Belfast and Dublin Castle. They rushed 6,000 troops to Belfast, more than were sent to Belfast in any stage of the Ulster crisis up to 1914. The police mutiny was easily suppressed, and the troops were then used to deal with what the RIC officer in charge described as the turbulent classes. Particular attention was paid to the Falls Road, not in fact a major focus of picketing disturbances. It was only at this stage that nationalists, whether from the Dungannon clubs, the precursors of Sinn Féin, or in the person of Joe Devlin, intervened to denounce the government. Devlin was soon enough to disown Larkin. Serious riots on the Falls followed, Devlin's heartland. The Riot Act was read inaudibly, and the military opened fire, killing in an all too familiar pattern 3 innocent civilians. Labour leaders played a significant role in subsequent peacekeeping efforts, but Fred Crawford, the future UVF gunrunner, was close to the mark when he gleefully recognized the significance of the episode. What a blessing all the rioting took place in the Catholic quarter. This branded the whole thing as a nationalist movement. The role of the British trade unions was disastrous. They provided minimal financial assistance and from the outset sought to end the dispute. Of the first settlement that they enforced, that for the coal heavers, Larkin aptly commented that they had withdrawn one of the wings of their army and allowed the employers to surround the rest. Worse still, the agreement was not even written down, and the coal heavers achieved nothing, not even union recognition. In the face of the police mutiny, at least one English negotiator, a Mr. Appleton, saw getting the carters back to work as a priority because they, that is the men he was supposed to be representing, were, quote, one of the elements of danger. Following the August riots, British Labour's increasing disdain for Belfast was eloquently expressed by future Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Snowden, when he spoke of that portion of the Belfast population which is almost as much accustomed to rioting as a savage tribe is to constant warfare. You know, there's a nice little sort of racial subtext to that. Belfast was simply out of kilter with the Labour Party's new emphasis on respectability since winning significant parliamentary representation in 1906. Their mood music was to herald a new age of industrial peace, illusory though that was to prove even in a British context. Meanwhile, Belfast, which had not even achieved the breakthrough of the new unionism of the early 1890s, was to be left in the lurch. James Sexton, leader of the NUDL, was lurching too. He had promised the entirety of the union's funds, but brought almost nothing. Now in August, he turned up at the meeting of carters, where they unwillingly agreed to return to work, armed with a pistol. Such was his fear of his members. It was not that Larkin sought to prevent a return to work in the face of the spectre of starvation. He was in any case answerable to a wider strike committee. And it is amazing how well on board the other strands of the Labour movement remained. William Walker was there, went to London with Larkin to desperately try to rescue the later stages of the strike. In the event, the Carters were the only group to achieve a reasonable settlement. The cross-channel dockers were left isolated and were reduced to humble petitioning to get back to work if they managed to do so at all. The 1907 strike was accordingly in the main a defeat. Particularly damagingly, those who suffered most were the overwhelmingly Protestant cross-channel dockers and coal heavers. This lent apparent weight to sectarian scaremongering in the unionist press, and notably the Belfast Telegraph, no moderate unionist paper then, I can assure you, that the purpose of the strike had been to displace Protestants and replace them with Catholics. All strands of the movement, which had momentarily captured center stage in July 1907, were to suffer the consequences of defeat. In the January 1908 corporation elections, all Labour and independent Orange candidates were defeated. By then, James Sexton had decided to cast Larkin into outer darkness too. Expel him from the NUDL he might, but the tinder of Irish unskilled labour conditions was ready to be lit elsewhere, and Larkin had already ignited it in Newry and Dublin. This made his new venture, the formation of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union in January 1909, viable. Now, to the grammar of an essentially English militant training, Larkin added a distinctly Irish dimension. But it was in some measure based on his experience of events in Belfast. Certainly, the formation of the ITGWU added to the difficulties of the movement in Belfast, or appeared to do so. But it should be emphasized that the collapse of the momentum of the 1907 strike predated the formation of the ITGWU. 1907 revealed one other thing beyond the extraordinary array of hostile forces that any labour upsurge in this city faces. And this was that a campaign carried on in a narrowly defined economic sphere, as the 1907 dock strike was, if it achieved significant traction, was perceived as a threat to the state itself and was dealt with accordingly. Insofar as we can reasonably include 1907 in a decade of anniversaries beginning with 1912, and it does require a bit of twisting, doesn't it? That can only be because it foreshadowed the Great Dublin Lockout of 1913. Indeed, it did. The issues and passions that first surfaced in Belfast in 1907 were played out on an epic scale in Dublin, though with the difference that there the nationalist business classes proved just as hostile to workers' rights as their unionist counterparts. Unionist Thomas Gallagher, the bogeyman in the Belfast dispute, found his exact mirror image in nationalist William Martin Murphy in Dublin. Meanwhile, in Belfast, it was not enough that any labour upsurge had merely been contained. One anniversary that I do not think we will be celebrating is that of the workplace expulsions of July 1912. Let's talk about the Titanic instead. Expulsions in which Catholics en masse were thrown out of work, but with commendable non-sectarianism, so also were rotten prods with a record of labour or trade union activism. And as the previous speaker has pointed out, exactly the same exercise was repeated in 1921. Thus, it can be said that this aspect of the unionist counter-revolution, which was such an emphatic success in 1912, was to leave a baleful legacy for the future. Thank you.